This is Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast, episode number 139. Today, our special guest is Beth Applegate, and we talk with Beth about building a multiracial liberation movement through a polarity lens. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. This is the only podcast that shows you how to leverage polarity intelligence, an essential competency for healthcare leaders, and the missing logic in healthcare, so you can create healthy, healing organizations and become a thriving, resilient, and unstoppable healthcare leader.
We are your hosts, Tracy Christofferson and Michelle Trosett. We've been best friends and colleagues for over 30 years. And during that time, we coached healthcare leaders across North America around how to create healthy, healing organizations.
Today, we coach healthcare leaders and leadership teams to live thriving, resilient, and balanced lives, combat burnout, and create the best places to give and receive care.
This podcast is for the unsung hero of healthcare, the healthcare leader. We want you to know we see you and we'll be here for you each week. In this podcast, we're going to challenge healthcare's industry norms, flip limiting beliefs, and share proven strategies so you can be your best self at work and at home, live and lead intentionally, and experience well-being and joy.
We are glad you are here and look forward to sharing the journey with you. If you aren't totally convinced this podcast is for you, just listen to a few episodes and convince yourself. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. This is Michelle.
And Tracy's here too.
Yeah, we're both here.
Yeah, imagine that. Another inspiring, thought-provoking interview.
Yeah, it was. It was so good.
It was. I have so much to learn.
I do too.
And I just really want to own that.
Yeah, and I think I just want to go park myself someplace for maybe 6 weeks to own that.
Yeah, because there's a lot to own, right?
There's a lot to own.
There's a lot to own. There's a lot to learn. Our interview with Beth Applegate was just amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, just she has so much knowledge and experience and wisdom, and just is so, just really just inspiring. Her words just really make you stop and pause, which is part of the process.
Yes, it is. It is. Yep. So we talked about her endeavor to create a multiracial liberation movement, and she offers some real insights that I thought were very helpful through a polarity lens of how we can really look at this, think about it, come at it from ourselves personally and how we can support each other. And it was just really phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, she really brings out the necessity for the both and lens when it comes to this movement.
Yes.
Right? So let me formally introduce you to Beth, and then we will let you listen to the interview because it's really something. All right. Beth, a white-bodied lesbian and cisgender, is the founder of Applegate Consulting Group, or ACG. It goes by ACG as well. And ACG is a collaborative practice with 3 decades of experience with national and international not-for-profit organizations, academic institutions, and governmental agencies. As an organizational development, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, or JEDI, Dare to Lead, Polarity Thinking, Somatic and Intercultural Development Inventory Practitioner, Coach, and Facilitator. Beth does a lot of stuff, right? Beth upholds the idea of multiple realities and facilitates processes for client systems to examine power, privilege, and dominant culture norms in order to operationalize the organizational core values into day-to-day practices. She has a lot of tools and a lot of experience. Mm-hmm. Beth is a member of the National Catalyst Ed's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Expert Hub, serves as faculty for National Training Institute Human Interaction Labs, and Beth is an active contributor to the field of applied behavioral science. She has authored numerous peer-reviewed articles for academic journals. Beth's newest publications appeared in the special edition on Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, June 2021 issue of the Organizational Development Network, along with 2 chapters on utilizing polarity thinking and race equity facilitation, which was published by HRD Press. Beth is a mixed media artist, a quilter, a flower gardener, and loves to dance. She currently lives in Bloomington, Indiana with her life partner, Trish, and their rescue cat, Bryce. So without further ado, here's our interview with Beth. Welcome, Beth, to Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast. We're super excited to meet your acquaintance and have a conversation with you today.
That's great. Me too. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And we have a mutual friend and colleague, Barry Johnson, and we last had him on our episode. He was episode 125. And how did you meet Barry and become a polarity thinker?
That's a great question. You know, I was thinking about that. I believe I met Barry in 2009. And he and Cliff Kaiser were presenting a workshop on polarity thinking at the Organization Development Network. And after that session, and the introduction to polarity thinking, I knew in my bones that this framework could have a powerful application to my racial justice and liberation work. And that's how I decided to become a polarity mastery participant and go into the polarity mastery program, which is, as you two know, a 2-year program.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your contribution to the second volume of And, the application volume. That's how we found you.
Yeah.
And just really loved your chapter. And so today we're going to kind of focus on that, the chapter that one of the chapters that you authored, Chapter 5, Support and Challenge for You and Me. And we're super excited about this conversation. I think we're going to learn a lot, for one, and just to be connected with you. I think you're doing wonderful, fabulous work, and you're bringing your gifts to the world in a very positive way. We're just super excited about that. And
thank you.
Yeah. And we've consistently said if 2020 and the pandemic brought anything, it was about reset, right? Mm-hmm. All of the challenges that we've faced in the last couple of years have really been a call to just reset on many, many different levels as individuals and as a society. And this chapter really is about building this multiracial liberation movement. And we're all about movements. We love movements, right? We're starting a polarity movement, and you've got this one going on, right? And using that polarity lens because people just aren't as aware of it. Some of them use polarities intuitively, but not everybody is really fully aware of the power of the polarity lens. And so we're super excited you're doing all of this work through a polarity lens and really applying this to ourselves as anti-racists, white people, and by doing the supporting and challenging ourselves and other anti-racist white people. And just to note for everybody who's not watching us on YouTube, we are 3 white women having the conversation. So we want to acknowledge that for anybody that isn't seeing us. And really just let's just start with you sharing with our leaders why you wrote this chapter.
Thank you. I will. So, I first want to really note that I appreciate you noting for our listeners that we are 3 white women that have been racialized in white bodies in the U.S. context. So thank you for naming that. And as white-bodied women, understanding and accepting that all 3 of us have been shaped by the social and political process of racialization is the first step to this reset. At an individual level, and then, as you also mentioned, in society. So, as we all know, race is a social construct that ascribes previously unclassified groups of people into racial identities. And for those of us who have been socialized in white bodies, we have been elevated in society as the supreme standard against which all bodies and humanity is measured. And that's the definition of white supremacy ideology. So while we white people are racialized, this process is often rendered invisible or normalized to those of us who are designated white. And as a result, white people may not see themselves as part of a race. And yet over time, our white dominant socialized culture, certainly in the United States, we have maintained the authority to name and racialize others. And so from a historical viewpoint, the term white, referring to people, was actually created by a Virginia slave owner and colonial rules back in the 17th century. And it replaced terms like Christian and Englishmen to distinguish Europeans and colonists from Africans and indigenous peoples. So European colonial powers established whiteness as a legal concept. And for some of the history buffs, you may remember that the Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, this is the period where indentured servants of Europeans and African descent had united against the colonial elite. And the legal distinction of white separated the servant class on the basis of skin color and the continental region. So the creation of whiteness meant giving privileges to some while denying them to others with the justification of biological and social inferiority. Whiteness is thus conceptualized as we should think about it as a constellation of processes and practices rather than as a discrete entity like skin color alone. So whiteness is dynamic, relational, and operating at all times on a myriad of levels. And this is why it was so important for you to begin our conversation today by noting that we're coming from the perspective of whiteness. And these processes and practices include basic rights, values, beliefs, perspectives, and experiences purported to be commonly shared by all, but which are actually only consistently afforded to us white folks. So that's why we see over several hundreds of years accumulated advantages and accumulated disadvantages. And as our healthcare audience certainly knows firsthand, there's no biological difference among different racialized groups of people.
Right.
And the racialized disparities in healthcare have exemplified the disenfranchisement and the accumulated disadvantages by some folks who are racialized differently than white bodies. And nationally, the COVID, pandemic is the most recent event to evidence the high relief of the long history of racial injustices and expose for all of us the inadequacies that we're still struggling with today in healthcare. Yeah. So as part of my responsibility taking, I say all of that because when I wrote this chapter, it was 5 months into COVID. It was in response to the murder of George Floyd. It was 100 days before our 2020 presidential election. And 400 years into my, indoctrination and my ancestors' indoctrination into a mindset and culture and interlocking systems of white superiority, to call myself and to other white bodies, as you've said, into accountability. And I think that call in, that phraseology is very important because Loretta Ross, really an amazing foremother in civil rights movement, a Black woman, a Black leader, talks about this phenomena of calling in versus calling out. And we need to call each other into accountability. We need to call in our family members, our colleagues, our friends, our partners in life into this responsibility. So in my chapter on support and challenge for you and me, I seek to support readers in recognizing their own proximity to power and privilege based on our white skin. And to understand that utilizing polarity thinking requires me to recenter my core values, continue to clarify my purpose, and assess my principles of engagement with other white folks and with myself based on love and based on support and challenge through a polarity lens and calling in as Loretta Ross teaches us to do. So my goal in my chapter is to really kind of ask us to sit with and talk with other white-bodied folks about this, the question that I pose in the chapter, which is, are you in right relationship first and foremost with yourself? And are you in right relationship with other white people as we seek to build a multiracial liberation movement?
I love that right relationship with you.
I
I
do
love
too.
that. I wrote it down.
I
I
know.
circled it in the book. I'm like, oh yeah, right relationship with yourself and others.
Well,
That's what it's all about.
Wow. Thank you for that incredible just synopsis. There was a lot packed in that, Beth, but it was just so well said. And because you brought very quickly the whole picture, I think, right down to your intention of writing the chapter. And I think that chapter just really jumped out to Tracy and I. We have had other podcasts, certainly when the whole George Floyd murder happened, we just really recognized there's so much we don't know. And one thing I was struck with again when you were talking is we often don't take the time to stop and even think about all this. And I really hope I really hope our podcast today invites people to do that.
Yeah, and I love the call into.
Yes.
Not calling out.
Yeah.
It's not about blame and judgment, right?
Right.
It's really calling into something that we have to own individually and collectively and understanding it.
Yeah.
It's really trying to understand it, right? Because it's underneath. It's so subconscious. We're so indoctrinated with it that it's easy to be unaware. And I think that's what happened for us.
Yeah.
Right. With the George Floyd murder it was like this, oh my gosh, right? Like I'm a part of this. Like you just don't always have that awareness. And so I think it just really was kind of a key point in time for many, many people to have this awareness.
That's so true. I think that it was a great awakening. The combination of the pandemic and us being home and in some ways in front of our televisions more often, along with the uprising that happened as a result of the injustices that still remain in our enforcement, legal and lawful enforcement, really brought to the fore for so many of us the invisibleness of the creation of whiteness and how it operates. I think that's so true.
Yeah. And you can't do anything about something you're not aware of. So you have to have that awakening and that awareness first. And until you have that, there's no movement, there's no change, right? So I've just really felt like this whole time has happened for a significant, supreme reason. Wake us all up, right?
Wake up, people.
Shake it up, wake us up. That's right. Wake us up.
That's right.
I really believe that.
Well, Beth, you point out that a problem-oriented approach to racial injustice keeps us stuck in either or thinking and how that unconsciously perpetuates, right, our society structures and contributes to the dysfunctional relationships and ineffective and harmful intra and interpersonal behavior. So this would be a really good time to explain the implications of, only having either or thinking, if we just stick with our either or thinking mindset, and how a polarity lens inviting and both thinking is critical to this multiracial liberation. Why we have to have that thinking as well.
Absolutely. Happy to. So I guess I would start by saying, similar to healthcare leaders, individuals, organizational movement leaders, and change agents seeking to strengthen the movement for multiracial liberation are often excellent problem solvers, right?
Yes.
And there's another way. Not everything is a problem to solve, and open to both and when focusing on human relationships. So we need to augment either or thinking, which is problem solving,
Yep.
with both and thinking. It doesn't replace it. It simply augments it. And, the other thing that I bring to the fore with my work is not only being a certified polarity thinker, I'm also one of the 700 worldwide Dr. Brene Brown Dare to Lead facilitators. And I utilize Dr. Brene's research on courage and vulnerability, shame, and empathy in my work with other white people to disrupt my own and other white folks' internalized whiteness. Okay. So the most significant finding that Dr. Brown's research in courage is a collection of 4 skill sets. And like polarity thinking, they are teachable, they're measurable, and they're observable. And so I've deepened my understanding of the value of being able to distinguish a problem to solve from a polarity to leverage. Because remember, a polarity cannot be solved. There is wisdom that resides in the upside of both poles, both value sets, and we must leverage them together for the greater good. So if we're thinking about being a healthy and in good relationship with myself and in good relationship with other white people in this movement for multiracial liberation, we have to address some of the ways that over the years we've been thinking about it. So for decades, approaches to power over and racism and equity and inclusion and justice have been and continue to be too often solely framed as problems to solve instead of a mixtures of, yes, problems to solve and changes in policy and laws and procedures and internal organizational policies. And though they are also dilemmas, paradoxes, and tensions that we, all 3 of us, live within and live within us. And too often I've noticed over my 30 years of doing this work that problem-solving approaches can devolve into kind of narrow-minded and dualistic thinking characterized by shame and blame of self and other. And using, problem-solving or thinking methods only can unconsciously perpetrate our society's structures and contribute to dysfunctional relationships and infective and harmful intra and interpersonal behaviors. And so it's very important to be able to hold that we need both justice and mercy. We need both humility and confidence. We need to support and challenge ourselves as we seek to disrupt white supremacy in ourselves and others, and as we seek to envision a world where all of us can thrive.
Yeah. And it was also the thing that struck me too is with the either, when we use the either or kind of thinking, and that's the frame of reference we're comfortable with. It's what we all know, right?
Sure.
Is that it gets to that kind of that blaming, right? Because when you use either or, it often indicates I'm right and you're wrong, right? Or this is right and that's wrong. And that's not what this is about. And that's the other kind of reason for the polarity lens, because it's equally important. It's the both and, right? And we need them both.
You're so right. And the other trap that I think in particular that we white folks fall into is that we've also been socialized in this kind of good or bad.
Yeah.
Right? Very dualistic, binary view. And I think a lot of us have been socialized to believe and we want to believe, and I think most people do, that we as individual white people are good people. And so when we think about the binary of good and bad, it's hard for us to reconcile that racism can live in us because of the way we've been socialized and by the construct of white supremacy ideology. And so we have this disconnect that can keep us stuck if we think about being good or bad as a binary. If I'm good, I can't have any racism in me. If I'm bad, all I am is a racist. So that's another way to kind of bring home the point of why we need both and thinking to augment either or, so that we understand that there are things outside of our control in terms of socialization, in terms of racialization, that, again, as we were talking about at the beginning of the program, once we wake up to, we can realize that multiple realities can exist at the same time. I can be a good person, and I can be conditioned by white supremacy and sometimes not realize how it shaped me. Both and.
Yes.
It exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so right. That's so true. So before we talk about the support and challenge polarity map, so for our listeners, in the chapter, there's a map which has, the positive outcomes of both poles of support and challenge, as well as some of the negative outcomes that occur when you overemphasize one and neglect the other, or you're not supporting the positive outcomes in an effective way, right? You're not doing things that will get you those positive outcomes. So there's a map that's been delineated, and we can even maybe put a copy of that. We'll talk about how we can maybe give people access to that in our show notes. So we can talk about that later,
writing a note down.
Yeah. But anyway, and then your invitation to self-reflect on it, right? You write in the chapter, a polarity lens allows us to understand a source of systematic racism without blaming and condemning, which I just love that. Ourselves, right? Or as a subgroup, white people, as inherently evil. This is what you were just talking about, without condoning or denying the existence of systematic white supremacy culture. So it kind of goes back to what you were just what you were just saying. But can you walk us kind of through why, for us to co-create new systems and generate these radical possibilities for equity, it calls for us as white people to embrace our part within this multiracial liberation movement, and how the support and challenge polarity kind of provides that guidance and that wisdom? How does that help us?
Great. Sure. So let's start on an interpersonal level. On an interpersonal level, either or thinking magnifies, as I was just saying, the false good, bad separation within us, and activates internal dissonance and diminishes our consciousness raising. We were talking about how important it is to wake up to this. And instead, kind of creates an aversion toward ourselves, which then can result in damaging our relationship with others. So as interpersonal relationships further devolve, polarized camps often engage, paradoxically, holding and advancing the false binary choices of you are either with me or you're against me. How often have we heard that saying out in our country right now?
Right.
And these vicious cycles have not and do not support us in right relationship with ourselves, or support us strengthening authentic relationships necessary with other white people and across race to build a racially just and equitable society. In fact, among white-bodied folks, our aversion can lead to an inability to own our shortcomings because we're so afraid of the dire consequences from our peers, from our self-talk, from self-protecting against shame and blame, something that we've already named.
Yeah.
And what we cannot own about ourselves results in identifying another, and not me, on whom to project our shortcomings. So those in or with proximity to power, right? Again, we think about racism as being power plus prejudice. So when we think about our racial identity, and we've been racialized, those of us in white bodies are very close to the proximity of power, can declare their projections as reality, right?
Yep.
That is also what white supremacy ideology allows us to do. And notice how unowned projections help or legitimize, I should say, this power over on whom we project in the first place. So whether that's me projecting onto you, I'm starting to engage in power over when I do that. And if I'm also not, if I'm projecting a lot of either or, you're with me, Beth, or you're not, to myself, it helps me own, it helps, it doesn't support me own some of the unlearning that I need to do, having been socialized as a white person. So, in fact, or thinking is a fundamental source of our systemic white supremacy in the first place. There are plenty of things happening in the world in which we have been and continue to be very cruel to one another. Looking for an evil source isn't understandable, but a misguided way to perpetuate this cruelty. So if we now think about, from a socio-political viewpoint, the cultural moment of the summer of 2020, when I wrote that chapter, and remains true today, it's important for white-bodied people to recognize the amplification of a dominant white culture narrative and this quest for an evil source. So again, as Barry has noted, we must recognize there is no evil source. No subgroup or humanity is inherently evil. So pursuing one good, the upside of a polarity, to the neglect of the interdependent good, another upside, right? Taking care of myself, taking care of others, leads to evil, the inevitable downside of an over-focus on care of self to the neglect of care of other, support of myself as a good person to the neglect of calling myself into accountability. So a polarity lens allows us to understand a source of systemic racism, blaming and condemning ourselves or a subgroup, white people, as an inherently evil grouping, does not allow us to disrupt the system. It keeps us in shame and blame, and ultimately we'll get the downside, because this is not a problem to solve, right? We need the both and here. If we focus on mercy to the neglect of justice, if we focus on support to the neglect of challenge, we will end up stuck in that vicious cycle that we know about from polarity thinking. And it always reminds me of a quote from Grace Lee Boggs. And she said, in order to change and transform the world, we must change and transform ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So this work of being an ally as a white body in a multiracial movement for liberation and justice begins with ourselves.
Nothing changes outside till we change on the inside.
Right on.
And that's a great lead into our next question, because you close the chapter by sharing a bit about your commitment to having an anti-racist personal practice yourself. So starting with yourself. So share with our listeners what that looks like.
Sure. And to all the fellow listeners out there who are also recovering perfectionists, I start by affirming that I'm loved just the way I am. Honestly.
Yes.
Okay, you're with me.
Yeah,
I can tell.
we are. Yeah.
And I think about, one of my teachers, Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. And, she talks about the fact that we have to learn to mind our own business. And what she means by that is we need, as I've said, to kind of start with ourselves and our own fodder and our own grist for the mill. So I start my practice, and as Rev says, we're always practicing something. So she's always inviting us to be intentional in what we practice. So as I've said, I start with an affirmation of myself that I am okay just the way I am, and I am loved for whom and just the way I am. I also, at the same time that I'm supporting myself, I challenge myself by acknowledging my mistakes and learning from them, listening carefully to other white folks as they give me feedback, and listening to other Black and Indigenous and other people of color who also offer me feedback. And support only for myself without challenge can lead me to continue to perpetuate harmful mistakes that go unchallenged, right? It's so important. And another really important in polarity in this work is intent and impact.
Yeah.
So I work from the place that I am the expert on my intent. And for those of us who know a bit about the Christian faith, we know we are taught that sometimes intentions pave the road to hell. So if we stop there and we only think about our intentions, then we're not holding what our unintentional impact might be. So it's really important to lean into and live into that I'm the expert on my intent, but the two of you are experts on my impact. And so if my intent has different impact than I might be aware of, it's so important to listen to feedback and to consider that and to leverage both, okay, I'm a good person, I know my intentions were good, and you know what? My intentions didn't land as I thought that they might, and I also need to listen to that. So we need both to support myself without and if I don't challenge myself, it leads to more mistakes. So self-love and self-compassion matter, and this responsibility takes root by being in right relationship first and foremost with myself, and then with other white people, as well as making commitments to the larger multiracial movement of anti-racist through organizations like Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURGE. So we have to commit as white anti-racists to change our relationship to ourselves and each other from transactional and compassionless approach to one that supports and challenges ourselves and others, and to find that courage in our similarities and in our solidarity and in our differences in service to racial equity and racial justice for all of our humanity. Another quote that Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams often uses is, love and justice are not two. Without interchange, there can be no outer change, and without collective change, no change matters. So part of my personal practice is also being in affinity groups with other white people who regularly commit to a practice of coming together and witnessing each other and supporting and challenging each other in doing our work of increasing our emotional and political and racial literacy skills, normalizing that we will make mistakes, and refocusing our energy and our skills really more in service to what happens after that mistake than the mistake itself, because it's a given. We're going to make mistakes. So in my community practice, we must increase our self-awareness. We have to live into our core values, and we have to practice. So part of my own responsibility taking is to cultivate this daily practice that keeps me more intentional in my action taking and more embodied in my thoughts and feelings and senses in my bodies throughout the day, and to becoming more comfortable with holding the contradictions, right? The paradoxes, the polarities embedded in the stereotypes and fears in myself. Okay. So underneath why other white people sometimes, and why I abandon myself and other white people, is because of my own socially conditioned, internalized perfectionism, which is part of white supremacy ideology. And my daily practice, and that's really what it is, about making choices to be in relationship with my feelings, to be in thoughts with compassion and empathy for myself and others, has resulted in me feeling more resilient, more embodied, and grounded, and in touch with my best self. The other piece I would say, and this is based on my work with Dr. Brené Brown, is understanding how shame operates in me and how I manage it in myself. And this comes back to another saying of Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who obviously is a big influencer on me, is minding my own business. So taking full responsibility for my own thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. And it's a complex dance, right?
Yeah.
To tease out what part of me is shaming me about my internalized white supremacy that I've gotten from society, and how might you be shaming me, right? So this idea of shame of self, and when I'm experiencing shame and blame from others, is an important thing that I think about all day long, right? We don't want to be in that vicious cycle of blaming and shaming ourselves. We have to have self-compassion. And we don't, as white people, want to blame and shame other white people for being conditioned and socialized and racialized in the same things and in the same ways that we were.
Right.
So the bottom line is I choose courage over comfort. And that's a big saying of Dr. Brené Brown, moment by moment, by fully seeing and being with my own behaviors, by being in right relationship with myself, loving myself, right?
Yep.
And then choosing to show love and mutual regard to other white people who are on this road, on this journey with me, in all of their humanity and the messiness of humanity, as we seek to create a more just world.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's all about practice.
Yeah.
It is.
Right?
Well,
It is.
and to me, it's just really about self-awareness. Like,
That's where it begins.
It's just a going in, right? We're just so caught up in everything that's going on outside of us.
Exactly.
And I just really like my takeaway was just go within and love yourself for who you are, but at the same time, don't settle for that, right? Challenge yourself around the things that need to change, and do your own work to understand what that is, right? And be receptive and open to hearing from others. And I just loved the intent and impact, because I think we talk a lot about setting intention, but you're so right. That intention can miss the mark in some big ways. And if you're not aware of the impact of that miss, then you don't have the opportunity to learn from that. And
that's right.
Yeah.
That's why the both and is so
Yeah.
important in the support and challenge
Exactly.
to ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just loved how you
Yeah.
put it within the polarity of support and challenge.
Yeah.
It just frames it differently, and it just is, to me, it just feels really comfortable. It challenges me, but it just puts it in a very comfortable place. I don't know. I can be with myself, but I can support someone else. So I think it's really brilliant the way that you did that.
Well, it's challenging in a non-threatening way.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's
right. It's still the challenge.
Yep. Still
but
the
it's
challenge.
not threatening, right? It's in a very respectful, open kind
Which
of a way.
makes you want to retreat.
It can. I mean, and that, going back to what Loretta Ross teaches us, for a long time in movement spaces, it has been more about calling out.
Yes.
Instead of,
calling in.
calling in with mutual regard and mutual respect for our humanity and the messiness of our humanity.
Yeah.
And also unconsciously perpetrating some of the things that we've learned about good and bad, about either or thinking, right?
Yeah.
And this allows us the pause that we talked about at the beginning of this program, taking the time to pause and going in with self-regard, especially for those of us who are recovering perfectionists.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, we've talked a little bit about this previously. We work with healthcare leaders and been in the healthcare system for a long, long time. And really, in the healthcare sector, they're really striving, right, for health equity is a significant initiative across the healthcare system in the United States, and a lot of national initiatives around that. And so what advice do you have for healthcare leaders when it comes to developing this anti-racist personal practice themselves in order to be able to impact this, radical possibility for health equity in our country?
Well, first of all, I guess I would like to just give a shout out to the two of you and all of your efforts by bringing polarity thinking into healthcare sector. So thank you both. And then I would be remiss if I didn't also give a wholehearted shout out of gratitude to every single healthcare professional and leader listening. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for your service. I guess in terms of advice giving, I think about one of my mentors, and it is this piece about being compassionate with yourself while at the same time you're taking responsibility for your feelings, thoughts, and reactions and actions. Remember, all of you out there, that choice and growth and liberation lie between that external stimulus coming in at all of us and our individual and internal responses. Practice taking that pause.
Yeah.
Just to be with yourself, and do so in a self-compassionate way. Take that breath. Take 4 breaths. And remain in choice in your response, no matter what others may do or say. Mind your own business. Commit to a daily internal and intentional practice of making choices to be in loving relationship with yourself, to be in loving relationship with your feelings, your thoughts, your compassion, your empathy. All of these things are key. And, one of the things that I think is so powerful about the work that Dr. Brene Brown does is her work around reminding us that we're hardwired for stories. This is just a part of the human condition. And owning our story and loving ourselves in the process as white-bodied people is going to be the bravest thing we ever do.
Yeah.
As is taking accountability and doing better as white folks that have been racialized and socialized in a white supremacy culture, and challenging ourselves to continue to show up in vulnerability, And again, Dr. Brene Brown, defines vulnerability as the willingness to show up and be seen no matter the guarantee of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our only path to love, to belonging, and joy, and to creating the kinds of conditions that all medical care providers, whether you're on the front line, you're a doctor, a nurse, a CSA, an administrator, a technician, we have to remember that all of us are loved and all of us must be accountable, and each of us is unique and all of us are connected. So start with yourself and loving yourself up, and start with challenging yourself. When you have those moments, as you've already said, of awareness, why did I react that way? Why did I say that? What got me to that kind of conclusion? And think about, hold that. The way we've been conditioned in our white bodies to think and to be disembodied sometimes, we need to unlearn some of those ways of being. So being and doing is another really good polarity here.
Yes, it is.
Start with being with yourself. Start with loving yourself, and start with a small practice, a small intentional daily practice of noticing, noticing why and how you're being and doing in the world, and do it with self-compassion.
Oh, it's great advice.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Beth. Wow.
I love having this conversation with you.
We're loving it too. I can't wait. We're going to have another one.
Well, thank you. I would love to. I don't know about the two of you, but I often find myself, throughout my life, teaching where I most need to learn.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
I think I wrote this chapter as much for myself as I did for everyone else. So it's leaning into loving myself and supporting and challenging myself so that I'm better able to support and challenge you.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, Beth, it's time for the missing questions.
Are you ready?
All righty.
Are you ready?
Ready.
All right.
Ready.
We got 3 questions for you. Okay, here's the first one.
Should I do a drum roll?
Yeah, do a drum. I'm just realizing I had a typo. That's why I'm like, that doesn't make sense.
Love that recovering perfectionist.
Oh yeah, just let it go.
Let it go.
I just didn't want to say. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Okay, I'm gonna do it a different way. Where are you most looking forward to? What are you most looking forward to in the next month? That's what it's supposed to say.
Mine says,
what am I looking forward to in the next month? Well, I have to say that my partner and I both turned 60 this year, and we are taking an extraordinary trip to Hawaii to celebrate. And so we leave at the end of next week, and we'll be traveling with my brother and my sister-in-law, his partner, and I'm pretty excited about that.
oh yeah.
Oh, that's going to be a great time.
And you're going to be gone like a month, right?
Well, not quite that much time. And we get a good long visit.
Oh, that's
so
great.
I'm very grateful and very excited about it.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah, we're excited for you. It's one of our favorite places.
Yeah, one of our favorite places.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And
Well, after the show, I'll get some notes from the two of you.
oh, okay. Yes, we love Hawaii. We love Hawaii, and we
yes.
love to celebrate.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a given.
That's a given, right? Me too.
Okay, here's the second question. What is a word or short phrase that summarizes you?
Oh my gosh. Self-love is a journey, and it takes time.
Okay.
Oh, that's a great one.
I love that.
All right, the last wrap-up question. Now, this one, we've been talking about these polarities the whole time. And what we know about polarities is oftentimes we have a preference pole, right?
That's right.
Even though we can get the best of both, we understand that there's benefits to both. Sometimes we lean a little further in one direction or the other. So for you, what is it? Humility or confidence?
In the last 2 years, it has switched for me, and it has definitely moved to humility. Where it had been my go-to was confidence. And I think the impacts of COVID and the murder of George Floyd and reassessing for myself the work that I needed to do to be an even better partner, an even better ally, an even better woman and daughter and auntie and white person, I now fully claim humility.
Oh, that's love.
And growing into my confidence through working on the humility that comes to me for really leaning into loving myself and then loving others.
Oh, well said.
Wow.
Awesome. Well, you did that really well.
You did. and obviously the first question was the setup because we knew we were going. We're so happy for you.
We are so happy and excited for you. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, listeners, we didn't know this woman 4 weeks ago.
No, we didn't.
So now we've met her. We've had a conversation with her. She's
a couple of them now,
yeah. And now we really feel blessed, Beth, to have you on our podcast. And, it impacts everybody. And then I think the last question that we talked about, too, is just knowing that our healthcare system is really grappling with health equity. It's just, there's pearls and wisdom of what you shared for all of us as well. So we just really want to thank you for saying yes to our invitation.
Yeah. It's been
And thank you for the invitation and the opportunity.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
we feel just honored to be able to share you with our listeners and all your wisdom. So it's been a wonderful interview. And for our listeners, we want to thank you for listening in to our awesome and incredibly inspiring conversation with Beth today. And we will look forward to having you listen in again in our next episode. So in the meantime, take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Healthcare's Missing Logic podcast, now a top-rated podcast for healthcare leaders. Please share this podcast with other healthcare leaders and anyone else you think would benefit. We are certain that if you found value in it, they will too. If you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any episodes. And also, it would mean the world to us if you took a quick moment to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast player. It helps to get the word out about our podcast and incredible guests. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to watch our podcasts. You can also follow us on our Missing Logic social media channels, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Until next time.